Back in 2009, as a result of discussions with Paul, I first introduced a private member's bill to provide for a scheme of compensation for the Australian victims of overseas terrorism analogous to the existing state and territory victims of crime compensation schemes. That bill lapsed in the last parliament. I reintroduced it in the current parliament as opposition leader. The government, to its credit, eventually decided to adopt the bill, but unfortunately the government has never made the declarations necessary for retrospective operation of the victims of terrorism scheme, and that means that the victims of Bali in 2002, the victims of Bali in 2005, the Australian victims of the World Trade Centre atrocity, the London bombings, the two Jakarta bombings, have not received any compensation over and above the medical expenses that were dealt with at the time. Now, we're about to celebrate or commemorate the 10th anniversary of the Bali bombing, the first Bali bombing on October the 12th this year. I think that it would be a very fitting way to mark the 10th anniversary of this tragedy if the government were to make the appropriate retrospective declarations so that all of the Australian victims of overseas terrorism acts or their next of kin can receive this important but modest help. I think it would be a mean-spirited nation that would refuse this kind of modest assistance to the Australian victims of terrorism or their next of kin. If it's right and proper, as I believe it is, for the victims of domestic crime to be assisted in this way, I think it's right and proper for the victims of overseas terrorism to be assisted in this way. As I said, I've moved legislation in the Parliament as a private member. Today I've written again to the Prime Minister requesting that the government make the necessary retrospective declarations. I hope the Prime Minister will listen to the plea that I make today and that is echoed by Peter Hughes and Paul Anasich on behalf of the victims of terrorism, and should no action be forthcoming, I intend to take further steps in the Parliament when the Parliament goes back in September. But we've got 300 Australians who were killed or badly injured in these terrorist atrocities overseas. They were targeted purely and simply because of who they were. They were targeted because they were Australians by terrorists who hate what our country stands for and who hate the things we live by. And I think it's only right and proper that a dutiful and respectful nation should give these people the assistance that is the least that they deserve under all the circumstances. Peter or Paul, would you like to add anything?
No.
Okay. Well, you don't feel you have to, mate.
I can only support what you say, of course, Tony. And when you first mentioned this to me those years ago when you came to Newcastle, as you know, I thought immediately of the children of the people who were with me and were killed, who I thought could just get a little kick along in life if this scheme was approved. Mm-hmm. Time's moved on. The boys of whom I was thinking are now at university and so on. I've got to know better the other family who's lost their mother, and those children are also growing up. But they're in the process now of buying houses and doing things like that, and I only think of them and think every day this must be on their minds when they awake, that they're the victims of this tragedy. It must be so tough on them.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.